I plan today to talk about a very specific part of SDG 9, and that is the SDG 9.c, universal access to information and communications, and actually the potential impact that that can bring as well. I will obviously also talk about, so what now, what happens next. Before we do that, I'm not here to talk about myself, obviously. I do want to set a scene a little bit, just very quickly. I spent a lot of time in telecoms and connectivity, and a lot of time with startups and big companies. And now today I run a website that really is there to showcase the wonderful work that people are doing to use technology to help achieve SDGs across the board. So today I'm going to share my insights on this. I'll also share some of the companies that I have had the pleasure of working with as some examples of some of the amazing things that can be done to change people's lives. 9.c, as we're going into this, as the world has gone through this massive digital transformation shift, I guess primarily driven by the recent pandemic that's still ongoing, connectivity has become increasingly important for all of us. In our modern world, connectivity is crucial, and it's growing on an exponential growth curve. The ability to connect with family, to do business, to be informed, to learn, develop, take part in society and even have our own legal identities is becoming increasingly a function of connectivity. So it makes sense that connectivity is a very crucial thing for us to focus on. In a recent study from Omdia, they had conducted a global study from executives from all over the world. And they had been asking them a couple of questions. The two big questions were really, what are the biggest social challenges that we are going to face in the next 5 and 10 years? And what are the technologies that are going to help address those? So perhaps, because I'm talking about connectivity, it shouldn't be a surprise to know that connectivity was in there. Connectivity was actually the top out of all of the technologies that respondents could have chosen to one, have the biggest impact on business and society, but also solve many of our societal problems. When I started thinking about that, I was initially a bit surprised. Why is it connectivity? When I look around and we've got wildfires raging, when I look around and I see poverty and I see hunger and I see all of these problems we have, how come is it connectivity? And I was initially stumped and quite skeptical, to be honest. But then I looked down the list, and second was education, and then it all became clear. So the two of them, when they interlink, they become this powerful, fundamental kind of building blocks, the transformational foundations upon which many other benefits, at least as I can see, will be derived from. So education helps us change the way we see the world, how we interact with it, and how we interact with our communities, and the values that we can both provide and derive from the communities, our environment, and our interactions. And actually, if you look at it, the number of different things that could come out of connectivity that are powered by or are made possible by connectivity and education are endless, really. I've just listed a few that come to mind here. They go all the way from simple human rights, from legal identities through to health and jobs and security, all the way through to being able to keep in touch with people and to learn new things. There's so many things that connectivity and education, when you combine them together, can really enable. In fact, if you as I spend my time looking across all of these different brightly coloured boxes, you see so many ways that the SDGs can be powered by connectivity and education together. In fact, what I thought would be quite useful to do here is just to talk about some of the examples that I've seen in my line of work and how these are helping make the world a better place. So I often get asked, what are the requirements of a company to feature on the website? And the answer is quite simple, really. It's got to have technology and it's got to be SDG. It's got to be doing something good that can be aligned to the SDGs. From a technology point of view, people get a bit caught up, well, what is technology? And frankly, I've written about biological technology, I've covered chemistry technology, and obviously a lot of kind of ICT connectivity type things. But it could be quantum computing, it could be space navigation, or it could be fax machines and text messages. It doesn't really matter to me, as long as those two things come together. And I think we'll see this in some of the examples that I'm sharing with you now. So I won't go into a huge detailing on all of these. I will make these slides available for anyone to download, and where you have a 3-dotted ellipsis on these, you can go straight to some supporting articles to find out more about them. But let's crack through some of these now and give you some examples. So on the top left, there's a company from South Africa. They're looking to solve one of the healthcare crisis problems across the African continent, and it's to do with access to medical supplies. So from speaking with them, I understand that particularly for chronic diseases like medication required for things like HIV, some people, quite a lot of people, have to travel to a clinic and spend 4 to 6 hours a month just waiting to be served. Now, this has a huge impact on their productivity, on their health, their own wealth and livelihood, but also at a broader scale, when you collate all these things together, there's a massive economic impact as well. So this company has used connectivity, and quite innovative connectivity, to deploy these kind of smart locker technologies across different rural areas, even in places where there aren't traditional mobile phone connectivity solutions. And it's having a very, very significant impact, to the point where they're being supported by the governments and they're trying to roll it out much, much broader. As I was working on as a judge in the Glomo Awards for the GSMA, I came across a project that Telenor is working on in Pakistan to really help with the problem of unregistered births. So if a child is born and not registered, then they have no legal identity, they are excluded from education, from healthcare, and they're at higher risk of becoming abused in things like human trafficking. So the application, the product that's come to market through Telenor and the local partners in Pakistan is quite a simple technological project, an app that people will take to the remote rural villages and help, but it's having a massive impact on so many of the SDGs. Top right of my slide here, we've got a project called Silvernet. Silvernet is from a company out of Berlin, Germany, called Dryad Networks, and what they're aiming to do is they're aiming to stop wildfires in their tracks. It's really interesting if you look into how the carbon emissions have been calculated and how they didn't really take into account the impact of wildfires, because for a long time people thought, well, the carbon will get burnt and then it'll get reabsorbed when the trees grow again, but that's fine if you have 150 years, but we don't. So they've got this wonderful technology, and they're able to literally detect a wildfire before it becomes a fire, and hence their plan is to be able to eliminate billions of tons of CO2 ever being emitted into the environment. They're doing really well. A couple more on the screen here. We've got 2 from Qualcomm. One that's improving crime detection and crime solving in El Salvador using just quite simple rudimentary 3D mapping and data collection. We got one that's being used in the oceans around India, Malaysia, and Indonesia to help fishermen become more productive, more efficient, and make it more safe for them. And then in the bottom right, we have a thing called GaugeMap, which is using open source data from IoT devices deployed around rivers to help provide some advanced warning to flooding that's becoming an even bigger problem for so many people nowadays. And this is just a few of them. There's so many. There's another one called PONS that's doing antenatal and maternity care with ultrasound devices in rural, unconnected areas. We've got a company from Pakistan that's doing USSD code banking for the unbanked across the African continent. I love that one because that's probably one of the simplest technologies that you can have on a phone. It doesn't even have to be a smartphone, and that is important when we talk about some of the statistics I'll mention in a minute. We've got self-contained renewable energy grids coming out of Sweden being deployed across Africa and the Greek islands to connect communities and schools, and it's just amazing things. I could go on for a long time, but I don't have a long time. And the point with this is there's some amazing things that are having a really strong impact on many people's lives and actually on the planet as well, across the whole planet. But none of these things can happen without connectivity. And without the education supporting these things. So, as the title suggested, the 9.C had an interesting goal of being 2020. The metric that was being measured was to significantly increase connectivity in the least connected areas. So now it's 2021. I just want to ask, how do we do? Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag, as I can tell. There's definitely some good news. So the good news is that growth there has been growth, and it is continuing. But certain targets have been missed. Some regions are actually going backwards in terms of connectivity, and there's still a huge section of the population who are underserved. About 40% of the global population are not currently able to connect to the internet. But even when connectivity is available, there is yet more work to do to derive the social impact that connectivity and education promise. What you see is if people are intimidated about using the internet, don't know about it, can't afford it, or just simply unaware of it, then they simply can't expect them to achieve any of the benefits that it promises. And lastly, and this is quite an interesting one that I only really discovered this week, is if you look at the most connected countries and you look at the LDCs, the less developed countries, the gap between the connectivity is actually growing, not declining. But we'll talk more about that in just a minute. This gap. So I've tried to talk about digital divide in terms of land. So here's what I think of digital divide. The digital divide is the gap between demographics and regions that have access to modern information and communication technologies and those that don't. And nowadays that gap is defined both as financial access, financial means, as well as technical means. In many regions, and I'll show you some statistics later on, in many regions that gap is closing. More and more people are being able to find connectivity and use connectivity and access the internet. So in many senses we can say that the digital divide is closing. The problem is it's not closing everywhere, and for those areas where it is closing, it's those people who have connectivity, the capabilities are accelerating. So we're moving into a new paradigm that I call the digital ravine. So where that differential between having and having not is actually getting bigger. So apologies for the cat in the background. I think it's going to throw my plants on the floor. We'll see about that. Anyway, live TV, as they say, never use animals or cats. So the digital ravine, I call this a digital ravine, and it's basically those who find themselves excluded are going to find themselves even further disenfranchised. And with the digital migration that the pandemic kind of really spurred on, then the ravine was exposed both in wealthy and poor regions. It was exposed between them, but also within the social demographics of each of those, irrespective of the national wealth. So as I see it, there's three components to the digital divide. We've got availability, awareness, education, and affordability. So this is where I want to just dive into some numbers in a little bit more detail. So here, these are some numbers from the world, our world in data. And what we can see here is that actually there's been a lot of growth. There's been a lot of growth in terms of the number of people being able to connect to the internet and have access to the internet. However, if we start looking at the difference between some of these numbers, this is where we start to see that even though the LDCs have gone from just around 1% of the population being able to connect to 17%, because the more connected regions have accelerated faster, the gap between those two regions has actually grown, and that I think is quite concerning. We need to look at that, because that is where the digital divide is turning into a digital ravine, and it's becoming harder and harder for those people to compete at an equal level. Pricing and affordability. To me, this notable and significant momentum has been made here, and change has happened. But to me, it still seems absurd that those who can afford the least have to pay the most. So I expect that we'll continue to see a lot of effort here to kind of drive things down here, and it's still prohibitive. But there's one other factor that goes before price prohibition, and that is awareness. So an ITU chart that I found here is showing that 97% of the people in Cambodia who are not using the internet or don't have access to it simply don't know what it is or what it's for. So they can't make a judgment as to whether it's too expensive or whether it's useful, because they don't know what it is. They don't want it. Same Bangladesh, 79% of the people who are not connected are unaware of it. So there's a huge education piece here to do. And it's not just you should be on the internet. It's about the benefits and the value across the board, from the basic needs and rights and access and safety and security all the way through to productivity and livelihood and the return. So to summarize on that point, How do we do? It's a bit of a red, amber, green scale, really. I think there's definitely progress in many areas, which is fantastic, and we should celebrate that. There's clearly room for improvement. And as I'll touch on in the end of the next slide, there's new problems that we need to be aware of. So this is a big chart, this one here. I'm not going to go into all of these individually. I don't have the time. I'm right up against my 15 minutes. But what I will say is I'll just conclude with 5G. We've heard all about it. We've heard all of the kind of hype and expectation, gigabits per second, and really tiny latencies and all of those things. And sure, those things will come. But really, for me anyway, 5G is much more than what you can receive as a consumer on a device. It's even more than this industrial IoT that we keep talking about. To me, it's all of the enablers that go in between it. There's so many changes to mobile networks that we're going to see happening in the future that it's going to have a fundamental impact on the whole connectivity space. I think basically it's going to create potentially new connectivity options from new connectivity providers that can help address all three of the A's that I mentioned before for the Digital Ravine. I think with this, we're also going to find legacy education institutions will be challenged, and the new international transferable education systems will develop through the availability and reach of connectivity. In fact, this is already happening. So these new education business models will thrive. Communities will become more empowered by technology. We're seeing this already. There's more community-led businesses being driven by the fact that people can connect and do things locally. And I think we'll start to see, particularly with the new 5G capabilities that come out, maybe we'll see something like an Amazon become a wireless provider. There's reasons why that could happen, and I think in Africa, I'm hedging my bets on that one. But we'll start to see local communities being given the responsibility and the opportunity to actually provision, manage, and educate all about connectivity and run those micro businesses themselves around new affordable connectivity solutions. So with all of that good stuff, there comes risk. So the divide will continue to narrow, the ravine will deepen, and we must focus on these three A's. We must continue to focus on these. Those pulled out of the ravine will find themselves in these unknown territories, facing unknown risks, and we've got to be very mindful of that. There's a huge opportunity for wrongdoing with these people who suddenly become connected. The provision of affordable connectivity carries with it that burden of security and education, and this is something we simply can't afford to forget. So with that, last slide, I just want to say with everything that I do within my business, I try and have an impact, a positive impact. And even for the honour of being able to come here and present this to this esteemed audience today, I wanted to have some impact on a global scale. So I partner with a company called B1G1, and here we go. This is a list of the things that I've had an impact on to say thank you for having me on today. If you want to go ahead and download these slides, you'll find them available. You'll be able to request them from that link there. And with that, I once again say thank you very much for having me, and please reach out if you have any questions at all.